PS. When it comes to these organizations, the parastatals, it is the CEO, the managing director, actually. But of course, the board gives direction. If it is found that the board also okayed a policy or a direction which is wrong, that is the only time actually the board becomes culpable. But I know there are situations where the CEO has also mandate to actually perform duties without actually going back to the board.
So according to you, the buck stops.
Let's not victimize people generally. Let's go for the individuals who are corrupt. And the moment we do that, that is the signal that will just realign itself with other members who are thinking to go.
Okay, Kioko, as you come in, I mean, the talking tough is not new. Equally acting tough.
We are not talking this time, we're acting.
Equally acting tough is not new. Because, I mean, if I take you back, and I talked about the procurement around the PPEs back then in 2020, we definitely saw perhaps former President Kenyatta talking tough, give a 21-day timeline in terms of, you know, unearthing some of the shadowed individuals behind that scam. This is 3 years later now. We are still waiting. So from where you sit, what's the missing link or the weak link in the fight against corruption? Is it the prosecuting process? Is it the political goodwill that at times is lacking? What say you?
First, thank you, Jesse. And I think every administration, the tempo of an administration is set in the first 6 to 8 months. If you look at when Kibaki got into power in 2002, the first scandal that happened in Kibaki's government and the rumors of corruptions that were happening in Kibaki's government that created the Mount Kenya mafia story happened in the first 6 to 8 months. And then everybody panicked about that government. And forever, that was the challenge of Kibaki's government. If you look at Uhuru's government, the Anglo-leasing scandal, first 8 to 24 months into government, how you react to corruption in the first months defines the tempo of your administration. Everything else will be referenced to that point. I think this decision on both KEMSA and even this one of the sugar, KEBS issue, is a defining moment in this administration. It looked, as Mheshimiwa is saying here, these scandals were not known. Some people might have heard them when the president was being interviewed on Sunday. But how the president reacted to it, it has set the tempo. It is now up to him. And the president was clear, and I think, I don't want to be his mouthpiece here, that agencies must do their work. The thing about him being briefed, he said, let it not come to us. I think that there's clarity on that. So if the agencies do their work, then he may also has to do the political bit in the fight against corruption. That is why on the KEMSA issue, all of us as a country must appreciate that move. Now this lady, the PS, let her go defend herself in the court of law because she was a political appointee. If she gets it right, use the political connections to find favor in this government again. But as it is right now, the president has set tempo. Now these are corruptions going forward. These are 2023 issues of corruptions moving forward. The president must take responsibility about that. But then there are also historical issues. KEMSA and the COVID scandal that hurt many Kenyans. He needs to deal with that COVID scandal. He needs to go for the perpetrators of that so that it doesn't appear like talk only. And talk is cheap. So while appreciating the fight about new emerging corruption, which will be there in any administration, they need to go back historically, maybe up to a certain point, so that we know, in truthfulness, was this KEMSA thing real or not? Was this COVID issue real or not? And those are not the only corruption issues that we're talking about. The fight against corruption is not, as it is perceptional, it must also be factual. It must not be used to settle political scores. Something that at the tail end of President Uhuru's government was a thing that went around, that if you do not support Project Azimio, corruption issues were being brought to your favor. President Ruto needs to be careful that he also does not take that angle of saying, if you do not support me, we will run after you with corruption issues. He must also be careful to say, not to be seen that those people allied to him, those people allied to him, their cases are being dropped left, right, and center. So he needs to balance that act of dealing with the historical issues. Now, the appointments that have been made this week, Interesting. It has been a week of politics, really, from Sunday, the announcement to today. DPP Hajj has been sent to NIS.
Yeah.
Maybe it's an administrative correction. He was a senior, but he was pushed to become DPP. The guy had never been to a court of law. He had never prosecuted anybody. His competencies as a functional lawyer were challenged by many and all. Now he's been returned to his base, to NSIS. But while he was DPP, just the same way Kinoti instituted charges which could not hold, these two people, Kinoti and Hajj, must be brought to account on the actions and misdemeanors they did while in office. Now, the president might be playing politics, but Kenyans as a country, we need to understand, why are these cases being dropped? Are they political, or there was no case in the beginning? If there was no case in the beginning, why did you start? Now, these are issues. This is a conversation, maybe, if the justice and the state inquiry on capture, capture inquiry, if the president had gone forward with that thing, today, certain administrative actions that had been taken in the fight against corruption, people would have clarity. Were they political machinations, or were they true? These cases that are being dropped would have been brought to the fore so that we understand this guy was taken to the court and there was nothing. The state capture inquiry would free a lot of speculation in the fight against corruption. If the president buries it in the sun and says, let's move on, it might look good on paper, but it harms the country moving forward. It is his responsibility as the CEO of this country to set the right trajectory in the fight against corruption.
Interesting. Dr. Arias, you come in, your evaluation of this whole debacle, because we're talking about a consignment that came into the country back in 2018. You know, and 3 or 4 years later, it's found its way into the Kenyan market. Quite unfortunate, even though we are hearing of whispers of top government officials who have been implicated to, you know, perhaps influence this move of releasing condemned sugar that was supposed to be, you know, turned into industrial ethanol. And once they opened those warehouses, they found the sugar is missing. So what say you?
Thank you very much. I'll want to pick from where my colleague has just said, people should not be charged for what they have not done. And that has actually been featured by the senior principal magistrate, Richard Ondiek, in today's paper, where he's warning DCI team not to take people to court for crimes that they have not committed. That forms the basis of corruption. Corruption means it's not only exchange of resources or exchange of money, but system. Once you corrupt system, it also becomes a real corruption. If a whole state department can arrest me, take me to court with no evidence, absolutely, I think the State Department should take responsibility. And I think we need to change a bit of our system in terms of the judicial system, whereby if you have accused someone and taken him to court for crimes that he has not committed, I think it's part of the things that will going to curtail politicians or even systems not to use individuals for purposes of their interest. Now, coming to the point of the sweet, bitter, or sour thing, the sugar, I'd like to start from the initial onset of having this contaminated sugar at the port. I mean, there are several stages in which this sugar has gone through until it has vanished, where we must have consumed during campaign time, because I'm sure it was sold during campaign time by our able politicians, and used that money for campaigning, most likely, because 2018 was very far and we had a campaign for 2022. Having said that, the initial onset of where this sugar came from, the source, to the port of entry, that will have been the point where the government decides on what to do with anything that is not consumable within the country. And it is at that point when decisions is made and any bad thing are destroyed at that particular point. When you find there is a political will, when you find there are big wings or heavyweights that are behind the businessman who is bringing or importing that particular consignment, then you will find that even at the port of entry, the consignment just comes in very easily. And then, what was the consignment to do with, why should the consignment go down in Thika when we knew that by the time the go downs at KRA in Mombasa, or even the dry port where some years we have been using the dry port here in Nairobi, were already identified as a consignment that is not fit for human consumption, then we have allowed them to go and take it to a private warehouse. At that particular time is when we went wrong. And I think taking responsibility for that particular aspect of procedural misfortune should be the initial thing that we shall start from. The second thing is that I don't think if the officials that we have suspended them, other than taking their responsibility as office bearers, have a very major role in terms of what has happened. That's a big scandal. You remember the scandal of the drugs in some years back at Pepe, and we know those drugs just disappeared. And a lot of, in your documentaries, I think one of your journalists made some documentary in terms of investigative documentary, where he identified that actually people who are linked to, officers who are linked to that particular process were all killed. Nobody knows where why they were killed. Nobody knows how their death have occurred. Okay. And in essence, it means that officers who are subjected to such atrocity earlier on, then will fear to take their role as as people who are subjected to that particular role. So what happens is that if the government will want to clean up all these things, I think we don't clean things within the country. We clean things at the port of entry, and that is where we think some of the things will going to be addressed. Right. And you will not, you will not have that opportunity to expose this particular consignment to Kenyans. I know we have consumed now. We are not very sure where that sugar has gone, and we know there are quite a number of sugars which has been sold in all our markets, and we know that will be a very big issue. So I know Mheshimiwa and my other colleagues must have one way or another, if they have been taking sugar. I've not taken sugar for the last 16 years, but if they have been taking sugar, then they must have consumed it. Now, the risk of consuming such contaminated component of food is that, the health of Kenyans is at stake. When you look at it very keenly, there are some things you will consume slowly and eventually finish you up. And I know very well, we know if we consume chemicals, one way or another, cases of cancer now has risen. Right. You know very well it is becoming number 2 killer of number 2 killer in Kenya, and we know the reason is because of all those external factors that we consume that might have propelled these cases for us to risk our life into such aspect of it. Finally, the president has taken one step, but is that step enough? He has taken political step by making sure that the first step of stopping those people who are, targeting those people who have been given the mandate to look over the whole process are suspended. But suspension is nothing. What we want is that these people the investigative agencies must do their investigation properly. Those who are capable of committing that crime must come to terms with the court of laws, and those who are clean must not be victimized, because there is no need of victimizing holistically a Kenyan who have been given an opportunity to work in certain department, and yet because of a mistake that he has not done, because of influence of other big wings that have forced them to do certain work, they shouldn't be punished for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well noted. And before we cross to Isido, we have to take a short break. But as we come back, we'll definitely break down the chronology of events and the questions around how could this happen under the eye of, the authorities. Because according to the chronology of events that has been covered on today's dailies, the suspects claimed they were ordered to release the consignment, which had been earmarked for destruction. However, an order to convert the sugar was given to convert the sugar into industrial ethanol. The process was to be taken jointly, supervised by KEBS and NEMA. Now, the suspects claimed the process was hijacked by powerful individuals who have been unnamed, who did not follow procedures, thus exposing the deal. And when it came to light, we definitely saw DCI detectives swing in. But the question is, when the sugar left Mombasa, coming to Nairobi, it did not go to the intended recipients. There was a ready buyer already, and it did not go to the 4 ethanol producing factories in the country. Interesting. Anyway, so that's the chronology of events. We'll be back with a lot more in terms of the issues behind the mystery of dirty sugar. Good morning. Stay with us.